Hi, Jasper here. Today I'll be talking about what I would think if Mal was the main personality of Mike. If you didn't know, Mike has multiple personalities like Chester, Svetlana, Vito, lots. One of those personalities is Mal, who is supposed to be evil. Basically, he does evil stuff for no reason. In this what if, Mal is the main personality. No Mike, just Mal. I feel like Mal can still change personality. He would probably make an effort to not change. Now, Mal did evil stuff for no reason, and had no strategy, like, what? I really wouldn't know what Mal would do randomly, so I'll keep half of his evil stuff a bit reasonable, and half a bit nonsensical, to keep faith to him originally. Also, this video includes a bunch of spoilers, but if you don't care, enjoy. Episode 1 would still go the same, with everyone being introduced, but when Mal is on the yacht, Zoe asks him, "Isn't the island beautiful?" And Mal would chuckle a little bit, saying, "Indeed it is." Mal would try to be a bit normal for a little bit, so he can potentially get some allies to help him through. When everyone is blown off the ship, Mal would see Stacy struggling, and would save her. When they're on shore, Mal would tell her that if she needs help, she can trust him. Mal would have a confessional explaining his plan to get a few people's trust, and then sabotage. He would also hope his other personalities wouldn't be triggered. Even though Mal is the main personality, it is still possible for his other personalities to be triggered, like Vito if his shirt is taken off. Everyone has to now run to a finish line. Joe would arrive first, and would be like, "Sorry you lost to a girl," and Lightning would be like, "What girl?" Now, Chris's team picking is so weird, but I'll just keep the teams the same as original, since Chris's team picking is truly unpredictable. Cameron would freak out over animal noises, and Mal would see this as an opportunity to gain his trust, as he would see Cameron as weak. Mal introduces himself as Mal to the team, and he would say that everyone can trust him in challenges, as he'll try his hardest. Joe would be happy to hear that, and Brick would like this attitude. Mal would tell Cameron that he doesn't have to be afraid, as he has him. Chris would announce the immunity totem, and Mal would immediately plan to look for it later. The first challenge is the totem pole grabbing and sliding. The rats get a saw, and the maggots get the trampoline. B would still come up with stacking everyone, and Brick would be climbing the tree. Mal would be cheering Brick on, trying to show some support. Now, without Mike's personality Chester being activated, the mutant squirrel wouldn't be shooting lasers. I don't think Brick struggling would cause Chester, because Mal would be dominant and emotionally stronger. I could see the rats getting their totem pole before the maggots. Scott would have a confessional about putting his plan in action and everyone not knowing what hit them. Mal would see that the other team is ahead and would jump to grab Brick so they can get the axe. Mal would then jump high and chop the totem pole, successfully getting a hold of it. Both teams are riding their totem poles now. B would signal everyone to lean forward, and they move fast. Zoe would call Mal as she's about to fall, and Mal would save her. The toxic rats would slide, using the log, and arrive down first, putting the totem pole in place. The maggots would still slide up and destroy the cottage, giving themselves the win somehow. Everyone is upset and confused, and Stacy would be blabbering about her fake ancestors and their inventions, which everyone on her team would be annoyed by. Later in the elimination, Stacy is of course voted out for yapping. Zoe would thank Mal for saving her earlier and would think that she can trust him. Mal would be chuckling in his head after hearing this. Over here, everyone is just chilling. Scott would be looking for the immunity idol and would talk about sabotaging his own team to create a false sense of security for the maggots. He says that in confessionals. Joe and Brick would be working out, and Mal is plotting. He plans to friend some other peeps on the other team, and hopefully vote them out later. After everyone is woken up, they have to walk to the next challenge. Mal would set his eyes on potential dumb people, like Dakota and Lightning, and Sam. Mal would first talk to Dakota, awkwardly complimenting her looks, and Dakota would be happy that someone in the cast thinks she looks good. Mal would tell Dakota that if she ever needs someone, she can trust him. For the truth challenge, Mal would tell everyone on his team to just admit to the embarrassing stuff so we can win. He's still trying to prove his trustworthiness. At first, everyone is actually playing the game. After Scott returns from the from his encounter with Fang, he would comment about his team being able to win without him. Mal and Joe would prevent the maggots from quitting. Anne-Maria would want to quit, but Mal would tell her that if she stays, he'll owe her one. Anne-Maria would sigh and stay. Lightning is complaining that his team wants to quit, and Mal is just gloating, "Do you really want us to win?" Lightning and B would object, and would force their team to stay in the game. Now that everyone is staying, it's a matter of who is more willing to reveal secrets. Mal would be encouraging everyone on his team to confess, saying that nobody would remember their secrets, and all this is one time. In the end, with Mal's help, the maggots win, as I can see peeps like Dakota being afraid to confess. Mal would be so happy with his team, and Joe would start to like Mal's energy and effort in challenges. For the obstacle course challenge, the rats have to wear glasses. I've organized the partners who are together: Lightning and Anne-Maria, Dawn and Brick, Scott and Joe, B and Zoe, Sam and Mal, Dakota and Cameron. Mal would encourage Zoe and Cameron to push their competitors so they can have an advantage over them. Zoe and Cameron would think that it's not nice and it's ultimately wasting time to wait, but Mal would insist. It would go smooth sailing for the maggots as they can see regularly. Anne-Maria big lead after Lightning is hit by a boot. Brick would go further, Joe too. Zoe would be complimenting B before she pushes him off. Joe gives the mutant maggot to Zoe, and Zoe would think of stalling for a while so B can get his rat. Zoe would reason with B that she wants to go against B in a fair fight. Joe would be yelling at Zoe to go, but she won't. I don't think Scott would be stalling because his team is already far behind, so he just goes regularly. Soon, B gets the rat, and Zoe would push him off. Zoe says no hard feelings, but B is unhappy and is approached by the bears. Zoe passes the maggots to Mal, who would accidentally bump into Sam, causing him to fall. He would then struggle a little bit on the bumpers, but would eventually do it. He would then pretend to bump into Dakota, saying sorry, and giving the maggot to Cameron. Cameron has a confessional saying that Mal's play is kinda dirty, but again, he's just playing the game and could have accidentally done it. It takes Cameron a few tries, but he makes it into the glove and wins the challenge for the maggots. Scott would think that Mal's moves are pretty dirty, but again, helping him self-sabotage, and he would like the guy. B would be with Dawn, who could sense B's worry with Mal. Dawn would also agree that Mal is shady, and she would tell B that they should keep a closer eye on what Mal does next. For the vote, Dakota is sadly getting out for not being a big help in the second challenge, and especially in the first one where she did not confess a thing. Over here, Mal is talking to Zoe and Cameron, tricking them into fully trusting him, because Mal says that he will help the two in challenges. B and Dawn are eavesdropping and find it suspicious that Mal is promising stuff, and it's working, as Mal seems to be shady with them. Mal would set his eyes on getting Anne-Maria out, as she doesn't seem to be close with him. The first challenge is to climb a mountain. A bunch of peeps are climbing, like Joe, Lightning, Brick, and Cameron, but Mal would be crushing junk up from the pile. He'd throw piles of junk at his teammates, slowing them down, and he would blame it on Anne-Maria. Anne-Maria gets pretty angry and confronts Mal with his lying, but Mal would just yell to Joe that Anne-Maria is sabotaging him. Joe would get pissed, but would get Anne-Maria climbing by telling her hair is out of style. B would notice that Mal is breaking stuff and throwing them at his teammates and would point that out to Dawn. Dawn now says that she's starting to think there is something seriously wrong with Mal, as he's sabotaging his team and blaming it on Anne-Maria. Regardless, I think B can still make the exploding couch and win the first part. Mal would blame Anne-Maria for slowing them down. Anne-Maria would try to say that it was Mal, but Mal would come back saying that he helped the team for the past few challenges, and there isn't a reason for him to sabotage. Joe would agree, and these three are just clueless, and agree, telling Anne-Maria to get her game together. Scott would have his confessional saying B's expert mind needs to go. For the next challenge, Scott would still choose the weak castle. Mal wants Anne-Maria to gone, so he throws Anne-Maria's hairspray in a completely different direction. Joe and Brick thumb war to see who is the leader, and Joe wins. Scott would come up with hitting the maggots with snowballs, and that works. B finds the iceberg and uses it to reflect the light onto the maggot's castle. Mal would see the castle melting and would pretend to build it back, but he would dig through the walls, causing the castle to fully melt. While this is happening, Joe commands Cameron to help Mal with the castle, as she now tries to make it to the other's base. While Brick and Joe are struggling with the rat snowballs, Mal would unsuspectingly throw a snowball at Cameron's eyes, blinding him for a few seconds. In those few seconds, he would grab the team flag and would run a little bit and slide it to the other side. B would see the flag as Scott sees the iceberg. B would pick up the flag as Scott relocates the reflection to Sam. Chris would announce that the rats win as they have the flag. Brick, Joe, and Zoe would be completely surprised, not expecting B to steal it. Mal would pretend that he got hit and smash snowballs on his eyes. As Joe looks back, she sees Mal and Cameron have been hit and can't see. Joe would be annoyed at the rat snowball strategy. Scott would have a confessional asking how they won and complaining because he won't be able to vote out B or Dawn, and this challenge can possibly make B recognized as very useful to the rats, making voting him out harder. Scott would then say that he has to step up with the throwing. Anne-Maria comes back with her hairspray. Mal would take jabs at her, exposing Anne-Maria's sabotage working, and Joe would be angry to know that Anne-Maria was sabotaging. Anne-Maria would try to say someone must have thrown it, but again, she has no good reason why anyone would have thrown her hairspray. In the elimination, everyone votes Anne-Maria for sabotaging. Mal's just very happy that she's gone. Dakota comes flying back, but Chris would get a call from her father and successfully gets Dakota back as an intern. Mal grins real wide as he sees that Dakota can help him in challenges and he can ally with her. Mal's obvious sabotaging is starting. B and Dawn sense something seriously bad with Mal. They now have the need to tell someone else about him before he causes havoc. They approach Sam, telling him that there's something wrong with Mal, who destroys items for no apparent reason and is throwing them at his teammates. Sam would find that pretty suspicious and compares Mal to a twist villain from his games. Dawn would encourage Sam to stay with her and B, so they can hopefully see Mal's suspicious activities. Chris would announce the souvenir challenge. Cameron would be admitting his fear, but Mal would comfort him, saying that with him, he's in good hands. Mal then switches his eye on Dakota, who he plans to extract some info from her. As everyone is running, Mal would catch Dakota and forces her to give some clues for the challenge. Mal would threaten that if she doesn't give clues, he would report her for helping him cheat to Chris. Dakota would be very pressured and would give the locations of each souvenir. Would Dakota know the locations? I don't know, but I'd say probably, as she's an intern and probably has to help put the souvenirs in place. Mal would catch up to his team, who are hiding in the bush, to follow the rats. Mal would tell everyone to follow him, and everyone would. Rick would be scared of the dark and would fall behind, fearing the dark, and he gets kidnapped by the spider. Scott would tell the rats to follow the maggots. Scott would tell the rats to follow the maggots as he thinks they know the way to the key. As they are running, Dawn gets kidnapped by the spider. Mal arrives at the tree. He would throw Cameron with no word, and Cameron's able to hit the tree squid's eye. Mal would thank Cameron and would grab both souvenirs. Mal would say he has found two keys and says that he'll keep the extra key to himself. As Mal gets down, Zoe is kidnapped. Joe would notice how Brick and Zoe are gone. Cameron would start to freak but Mal wouldn't think anything is going on and just continues. The rats arrive with 4 of their members. Sam notices that Dawn is missing. B would sense something is very wrong. As Lightning climbs up to find no keys, B would bring Sam and Scott, the 3 together. Sam would ask what B is doing, and B would try to signal something is wrong, and they should stay together. Scott questions what B is even saying, but B points at a tree and Lightning is not there, as he has been kidnapped. Scott would start to worry and tell everyone to move together. Soon, both teams make it to the cemetery. B would send Sam and Scott to Mal, who has found the gravestone. Sam and Scott would thank B for the find and run for them. B stands behind, smirking, but he instantly gets kidnapped. Mal would grab the flashlights, leaving none. Scott would complain that they left them with no flashlights, but Sam would tell Scott to just follow them. Mal would go into the cave to find a big spider web. Joe and Cameron are terrified of the spider web and want to save everyone, but Mal wouldn't care. as they have more team members and would want the win. Joe would yell at Mal for being a bad team player and not saving their fellow contestants from an active threat, the spider. Mal wouldn't care and would leave them. Cameron is sus that Mal would just leave Zoe and Brick behind. Sam and Scott arrive, horrified by the spider web. Scott sees Mal leaving for the zipline and follows behind. Sam would try to get Scott to help get everyone, but instead collaborates with Cameron and Joe, who probably want to get everyone down. Cameron would probably think of getting the hooks and throwing them up to hopefully release everyone. Mal and Scott are now riding the zipline and arrive out of the cave seeing Chris. Chris would be impressed that Mal surprisingly went to the right places, instantly not knowing he cheated. The maggots win today, as they have 3 members remaining compared to 2 on rats. Cameron, Joe, and Sam would probably be able to get everyone down sooner or later, and Cameron would get the spider down fighting it. It is then revealed that Izzy is the spider, and Cameron's arachnophobia has been cured. Before the elimination, B, Dawn, and Sam would all be talking together on who to vote for. They'd probably want Lightning out, as Scott seems to be helpful, and Lightning hasn't. Sam would point out that it's weird that Mal didn't save everyone when they were on the spiderweb. Dawn and B would agree that it's very unsportsmanlike behavior towards teammates. Sam would also point out that Mal knew where to go. These 3 are now trying to gather info to solve their suspicions and expose Mal to everyone. In the elimination, the 3 vote for Lightning, meaning he's out. Well, actually, no. He actually has to switch teams. Yeah, everyone is surprised, and Scott is worried as he knows he could be the next out if the team loses again. Now that Lightning is on the maggots, Mal would find Lightning's attitude a bit annoying. Lightning would be complaining that his protein powder was stolen and would accuse Mal of stealing it. Mal would plot that he wants to get Lightning out as he's kinda annoying. Scott knows that he needs an ally so he can try to make the votes equal if his team loses. Scott knows that B, Dawn, and Sam are pretty close, and he needs to find a way to break them apart. Sam would notice that his gaming console is missing, but B would find his hat nowhere. Scott knows that Dawn and B are pretty close together, so he would want to go for Sam. Sam would notice his gaming console is gone, and B would notice his hat is gone. Dawn would be the first to assume someone is cheating and would tell B this. Cameron and Zoe approach Mal, asking what happened last challenge, and why did he not save them. Mal would nervously say that the challenge was first to arrive to Chris. Cameron and Zoe are suspicious, but they don't think anything is wrong, and Mal is just helping the team, so they believe. Mal would then talk about Lightning and how he doesn't like him, and Zoe would encourage Mal to just meet the guy because he seems like a good person. Mal would just deny. For the next challenge, Joe would volunteer. Brick would like to try to take the position, but Joe would just say that he's weak. Scott will volunteer for the rats so he can sabotage, and his plan will go well. Now Mal wants Lightning out, so he would step on the air pump while Lightning pumps it. And Lightning doesn't notice that the air is being blocked, so he just keeps pumping. Brick would notice that Mal has his foot on the pipe and would push him off. Joe wouldn't be able to breathe, but now she finally gets air. Scott would slowly move underwater in no rush while Sam is pumping. Scott then sees Fang and freaks out. Fang then gets a hold of him and tugs him around. B and Dawn would have gone to the beach already. Zoe and Cameron don't think that they're useful for this part, so they just walk over to the beach. They meet up with B and Dawn, who are happy to see them there. Dawn would inform Cameron and Zoe that Mal is very suspicious. Dawn would tell them that Mal was destroying your castle in the ice challenge. Cameron would be confused as he thought Mal was helping him. Zoe would just say that Mal was helping Cameron. Dawn would then say that Mal knew the places to go in the last challenge, and she suspects Mal of somehow cheating. Cameron and Zoe think, and they say that Mal just knows his way. Dawn would be annoyed that they're not phased, and would say that everyone has had an item stolen from them this morning, like B and his hat and Lightning and his protein powder. Zoe would find that suspicious, but wouldn't think Mal did that. Zoe would claim that Mal doesn't do that, and it could be anyone. Dawn sighs, as the two just don't get her points, so she closes off with, be aware of Mal's suspicious activities, as he could be manipulating you two, and then he will vote you two out. Cameron and Zoe take note. Anyways, rats win as Fang would send Scott flying to the water skis, releasing them. For the water skiing challenge, Lightning will drive, Mal shoots, B drives, and Scott shoots. I'll briefly go through this. Mal keeps shooting and hits one but misses the rest. Soon Lightning asks how he's not shooting anything, and Mal shoots Lightning. Mal would say that Lightning became unconscious somehow and they crash. Scott would do the same, hitting one and then missing the rest. Then he would shoot B and manage and sabotage the team. I don't think the maggots would replace anyone, so they would stop at some point and Joe would throw Cameron as a last-minute effort. Cameron's able to set off a bomb. On the other hand, Dawn replaces the board with B. She opts to drive and Sam for shooting. Scott cannot argue against this decision as he's missed almost all his shots. Rats would do good and then they'd set off more bombs, winning the challenge. Since the Rats won, Scott wouldn't accuse someone of stealing the items yet. For the voting, Mal would tell Zoe and Cameron to vote Lightning as he's the reason why the vote stopped. Joe would vote for Zoe as she sees everyone has done something today, but Zoe hasn't. Brick would see Mal's action of shooting Lightning is friendly fire and a soldier must never, so he'd vote Mal. Lightning just votes Cameron as he views him as weak. With 3 votes, Lightning is out. Joe would sort of be surprised but Brick would not like that Lightning was voted out for no good reason. Mal would be laughing that he got his target off. Brick does not like Mal at the moment. Dawn would tell B that she senses something not right with Scott. Dawn doesn't think Scott stole the items, but he did shoot B and almost threw the challenge for the Rats. Dawn would tell this to Sam, but Sam would think that it was an accident. Scott walks in while they have the talk, and would thank Sam for standing up for him. Scott knows that if he doesn't ally with someone on his team, he could get voted out. He sees Sam as a potential ally, as Dawn and B would never betray each other. B wouldn't be happy that Sam is standing up for Scott, and Scott would be thanking Sam, taking him out of her room. B would signal Dawn that they should keep a closer eye on Scott. The same talk would be happening with Brick and Joe. Brick would be saying that Mal shot Lightning on purpose, but Joe would say no, and that it was an accident. But Joe would insist a lot that it was an accident, and if he doesn't agree, he's going against his rules by talking back to the commander. The challenge is the runway animal one. Mal would immediately go to Dakota for help. Mal would force Dakota to only help him in every challenge, or else he will expose her to Chris. Dakota is terrified and would agree because she still wants to be in the show. Dakota would tell Mal to give the animal striped clothes. Sam would also think of asking Dakota, but when he goes up to Dakota, Dakota just says she can't help anyone, which bums Sam. Now, for the animals, Cameron would suggest the maggot, and Mal would instantly dress up the maggot, saying it looks perfect now. Everyone is shocked Mal already knew what to dress the animal with, but they go along not complaining. Dawn's able to get along with animals, so I can see her easily recruiting a mutated rat, like the one from the second challenge. I feel like B can have some cute ideas for the rat, like putting it in a dress or a hoodie or giving a hat to it. Once B is able to dress up the rat, Scott would say that the rat looks terrible in the outfit and he should dress it. Dawn and B wouldn't be too happy with Scott's opinion. Dawn would tell Scott that they will give him one last chance to make the rat look good. Scott has a confessional that he is thinking of getting either B or Dawn out. B because he's too smart, and Dawn because she's kinda getting on his nerves lately. Scott would search for the worst outfit. I don't know, he could find a dress and then get it muddy and tears it to pieces. Scott would show the dress and put it on the rat. B and Dawn do not like the outfit. Dawn would snap, asking Scott if he's trying to sabotage the team. She would say the dress is terrible and would accuse Scott of shooting B purposely in the last challenge. Now Sam wouldn't know any better of the last challenge and would try to defend Scott, saying that at least he had creative ideas. That could show not everyone is perfect and we all have bad/dirty days, just like the heroes of video games. Now the maggots would show off their maggot with the striped clothing. I don't think Chris would be a fan of the striped clothing, nor Chef, but maybe Lindsay would. I can see Chris rating the maggots a 6, same with Chef, and Lindsay rates it an 8, so the maggots get 20 points. Scott would run up to stage. After arguing with Dawn, Scott would present the rat with the torn up dress and mud. Yeah, Chris and Chef don't like the look and rate it a 2. Lindsay probably doesn't like dirty ripped up clothes, so I can see her rating it a 4. The rats lose with 8 points. The second challenge wouldn't happen as Lindsay wasn't kidnapped by Sasquatch and Aqua. Everyone now on the team would be upset that they lost, especially B and Dawn, who take jabs at Scott for sabotaging challenges. Sam wouldn't be as mad as B and Dawn though. Later in the elimination, Scott would get all the rats in the cabin. Brick would also pop up in the cabin too. Scott would try to discuss what happened to everyone's items. Then Scott would bring up the bag and tell Don that she forgot it on the boat of the last challenge. He then accidentally drops the bag, spilling everyone's stolen belongings. Man, almost everyone's angry, and Brick's like, Don, you're a thief? Scott would then say in the confessional that he stole everyone's items to frame Dawn for stealing because Dawn is becoming a threat, and she can talk. That's why he chose to frame her over B. B would know better that Dawn would never steal, and is not believing in the facade. With Sam not happy with Dawn, he and Scott vote for Dawn. Dawn and B would vote for Scott, as he's the greatest threat. It's 2-2, and they have to go in a tiebreaker. Dawn would pull up a fake immunity totem, which Scott made, and Chris says it's fake, so the tiebreaker still happens. Now, I don't know if the tiebreaker would be to save Lindsay. I can see Scott winning, but if it's another runway model, then Scott would struggle. I feel like Scott would go try-hard mode, and would sabotage Dawn in any scenario, winning the tiebreaker. Dawn would tell B to get rid of the rat next, and B would agree, and would take one last jab at Scott. For the team swap, Joe and Scott would still swap. Now, Joe would be happy with her new team, saying to B and Sam that she'll make this team to this finale. Scott, on the other hand, is not happy that he's separated from Sam and can't vote for B. Brick, Cameron, and Zoe would welcome Scott to the team. Mal thinks that Scott would make a good ally, as he can sabotage, as shown in the last challenge. Mal pulls Scott out to propose an alliance. Mal would point out that we can sabotage teams and we can control the game if we keep this up. Scott would think for a moment and would agree with fingers crossed. Scott has a confessional saying that he wants to mess with Mal by reversing his actions so he can reassure his dominance to himself, and he can vote out Mal later, as he's too smart. After this talk, Brick would pull Scott out, telling him to not trust the guy. Scott assures Brick that he's not going to trust Mal. Now, everyone would rush into the freezer for food, getting trapped in a truck and being deported to the mine. It's a Gilded Chris mine challenge. Dakota would still be sent to the mines and end up bald. Mal would have the mindset of completing this challenge as fast as he can to get back at Joe for switching teams. Mal would only tell Scott to finish this challenge as fast as he can. Joe would be leading her team first. I assume the rats went to the left tunnel, as the right tunnel was a bit different, so Joe would lead her team there. Scott would point over to the right tunnel, and Mal grabs all the flashlights. Joe has the firefights, by the way. Scott would tell Brick what's that while pointing to the left cave, and while Brick's distracted, Scott pushes him into the dark, where he stays for a bit of time. Yeah, Brick's terrified and is begging for his team, but nobody hears him. Later in the minecart area, everyone notices Brick is gone and worries, but they keep on moving. Mal takes Zoe on the left track, and Scott takes Cameron on the right. Scott would still end up in the waters, and Cameron would get kidnapped. Scott would call out for Cameron to no avail, and would tell Mal that they're missing. So they're missing Brick and Cameron, and Mal doesn't want to lose Cameron. So he'd go back to find a cave. Yeah, Scott thinks sabotaging Brick and Cameron going missing is going well in his plan. Brick could go through the left cave and meet up with Joe, who tells Brick to go his own way, but Brick is terrified. Yeah, we can see Brick and the rats get kidnapped by the pigs. Cameron, who is first to be kidnapped, would scream at the sight of mutated pigs and a green goblin being Ezekiel. I think Ezekiel would act a bit aggressive to Cameron, as he doesn't find him hot and probably sees him as prey. Cameron does notice the Gilded Chris Awards, but doesn't want it yet. In fear of being harmed, yeah, Brick and the rats are taken, and Cameron is glad they came. Mal would soon find the cave leading to the hideout. Mal would be surprised with all these pigs, and I think he would battle the pigs to get Cameron and Brick back. When Brick is released, Mal goes out to beat Ezekiel. Scott would grab the rat's Gilded Chris and plant it near the rats who are trapped. Scott would ask the rats if they need some help, and they do. Scott would then beat the rats, releasing Joe, B, and Sam. And he'd point out, "Isn't that your team's Gilded Chris?" Joe would snatch it, grinning and dashing with her team to the minecarts. Joe would thank Scott for the win. Mal would see the rats on the minecart and would immediately grab Brick, Cameron, and Zoe, along with the Gilded Chris, and they hop on the minecart 8 seconds after the rat leaves. Scott would also hop along. The rats arrive first, winning the challenge, and then the maggots. Mal would be angry that his plan did not work. While Scott is happy, he can annoy Mal and pretends to be sad too. Yeah, before elimination, Scott and Mal meet together, and they agree to vote off Brick, as he was the first person to go missing, and they don't want to vote out Cameron or Zoe yet. Yeah, Mal would also tell Scott that he's going to step up the game by speeding through the challenges. Scott in the confessionals also plans to step up his sabotaging. Meanwhile, Brick would talk with Zoe and Cameron, warning them about Mal, warning them about his sabotaging, cheating, and him working with Scott. He would propose them that they should vote out Mal. Cameron and Zoe, I don't think they would agree as far as they know. Mal and Scott saved Cameron from the pigs, and Brick got lost, and Brick should be thanking the two for saving them. Brick would lastly tell Cameron and Zoe to consider his words, or else they'll be the next victim of Mal. Yeah, in the voting, Mal would angrily tell Cameron and Zoe to vote out Brick, angrily, because he really thought he could speed through the challenge, but it didn't work because of Brick. With everyone voting for him, Brick is out. Brick would be angry at everyone and exposes Mal's Shady's actions and accuses Mal of working with Scott, which Scott would pretend to be confused about. Yeah, Cameron and Zoe probably would slowly lean further from Mal as 3 people have warned them about Mal, and they can no longer ignore these warnings. I should mention, I don't think anyone would be fooled with the fake diamond, and Dakota is not coming back as a competition is not down a player. And Brick wouldn't expose Mal for cheating as he doesn't know that. Before the challenge, B and Sam would talk to Zoe about Mal's suspicious ways. Unlike the other talks, Zoe actually considers staying away from Mal for a little bit. In this episode, Cameron wouldn't be diagnosing Mal's other personalities as they haven't shown up yet due to him being good at hiding them. Like, Mal doesn't trigger Manitoba or Vito because he doesn't put on a hat or take off his shirt. Svetlana is not activated as he is not afraid. Chester is not activated as he doesn't over-exaggerate. And Mike is not activated as he doesn't truly care for Zoe. For the first challenge, Chris announces the immunity totem has been found. Joe takes the leader role, forcing B and Sam to kick while she rows the raft. Scott's sabotaging would be at an all-time high as he wants to see Mal in pain by voting off either Zoe or Cameron. As Scott is kicking, Fang would appear, but Scott uses Fang to slow his group down by not kicking. The rats would be confronted by the Kraken, and I can see Sam using his gamer moves to defeat it. He is able to severely hurt its eyes and makes it leave for the maggots. Mal would notice that Cameron and Zoe are staying in a noticeable distance away from him. He asks Cameron and Zoe to help row the boat with him rather than kick. They would decline, but the Kraken appears, and Cameron would have the idea. Cameron would trigger the Kraken to hit the raft, sending everyone flying to shore. Scott would see this plan in action and now knows who he's voting out. Yeah, the maggots are launched to shore, and they win the map and compass. The rats arrive much later, winning the locks and metal detecting device. Now the second challenge is to rescue Gwen and a random contestant. Instead of Sam, Dakota will be there. Sam and Dakota probably wouldn't be friends at the moment because they barely got any time together. When approaching the toxic swamp, Mal doesn't want to be contaminated with whatever chemicals, so I think Mal chooses to go left and asks Cameron if it's good, and I think Cameron agrees. Scott would try to get close with Zoe by asking her if he can trust her, and Zoe says that she won't tell. Scott would show his immunity idol. Scott would tell Zoe that they need to get Cameron out to make Mal powerless in the next vote. Zoe wouldn't like to vote Cameron out as they're friends, and Scott would give her 2 choices. 1, get manipulated by Mal and be voted off in the next vote, or vote with me and make it far. Zoe will need some time to think. Mal would make an arrow to the toxic swamp to fool the rats, but Scott would cover it up while Mal isn't looking and would point it to the other path they're going. Now Scott would purposely walk slowly so rats can catch up. Mal would keep telling Scott to move, but he'd still walk slowly. The maggots finally arrive at the dig site, and not long after, the rats would catch up as they saw the arrow. And Joe made B and Sam run fast. B would probably think the detector would detect metal, and he happens to have it. B would be flopping on the floor and successfully finds the key for the Team Rats locks. While that is happening, Scott would hear Gwen's yelling and complaining about a creature that is evolving with her. Scott would purposely tell everyone to dig somewhere else, and Mal is digging as fast as he can. B would hear Gwen screaming and immediately digs with the detector, finding Gwen as well as Dakotazoid. Rats win for finding Gwen. Sam would ask what happened to Dakota and would take Dakota out to talk. Mal is just frustrated and thinks Scott had something to do with it, pulling Scott towards him, and Cameron and Zoe are bewildered by the scene of Mal showing his nasty side. Scott would chuckle as Mal puts him down. Before elimination, Zoe would come up to Scott to agree with the plan to vote out Cameron, as he was too cooperative with Mal today. Mal would force Cameron to vote for Scott, of course. In the elimination, the votes are tied between Cameron and Scott. Cameron is just confused and Mal is angry. Scott would then pull out his immunity idol, getting Cameron out. Mal is angry that Scott found the idol. Well, he expected that, but didn't expect this to happen. Cameron is sad, and Zoe apologizes to him, promising that she will play for him and kick Mal's ass. Yeah, Mal is full on angry with Scott and Zoe, and plans to target them somehow. In the beginning, Mal would be talking to DakotaZoid, forcing her to give him intel on the next challenge. DakotaZoid never got back in the game, and wasn't voted out, so she'd still be an intern. At this point too, DakotaZoid and Sam are friends. Yeah, Mal is upset that DakotaZoid couldn't help him in the last challenge, as he almost got voted out. So he'd be yelling at her. Being observative, will hear Mal's yelling, and would listen closely. He hears that Mal is telling Dakota to give him some intel on the challenge, and DakotaZoid would give intel. Mal now knows the challenge, but B now knows that Mal is cheating, and plans to expose him. B would go up to Scott, showing Mal with DakotaZoid, and would signal that he's cheating. Scott wouldn't get what B is saying, but would keep an eye on Mal, and possibly take advantage of whatever happened. Chris would announce the merge, and everyone is happy. Zoe would celebrate with Scott rather than Mal, who is now a lone wolf. Scott gets a bit worried that he wouldn't be able to see Mal's demise, but he starts plotting again as he knows Mal is cheating and can cause misery to him, and a satisfactory elimination to him. Mal could set his eyes on allying with Joe or Sam or B, as he thinks he can ally with them. As Mal goes up to Joe to talk to her, Scott would pull Mal away. Scott would tell Mal that he saw him cheat with DakotaZoid. Mal would be like, "Nobody sees me cheat," and Scott would be shocked that Mal admitted to cheating. Scott would make an agreement with Mal that if he helps Scott anytime he needs help in the challenge, he won't expose him. Now Mal would pretend to reluctantly agree, but plans not to help Scott, and instead sabotage the challenge for everyone. Chris announces the challenge, the key search, and the key search would start. Everyone would be rushing to find a key. Mal would be rushing to find every key, so he can keep it all and no one would have one. He would be suspiciously fast. He finds a golden key, but Scott demands Mal give it to him. Mal refuses, so Scott would holler, "Everybody!" as he's about to expose the secret. But Mal would just give the key in time, as Mal doesn't want to possibly be kicked out of the show for cheating. Scott goes ahead to help Zoe find a key. B and Joe would find keys. Later, Zoe, Sam, and Mal find keys. Mal is so angry he wasn't able to find any more keys, but he rushes to the go-karts to break them. Everyone is running from Laser Squirrels and Chef, but Mal would be punching and removing wheels from all but one go-kart. Sam would treat this entire challenge like a video game, and I could see him do pretty good with his gamer moves. Mal would hop in one of them, but Scott would demand that Mal tow his golden go-kart. Mal refuses, but Scott yells out for Chef, which makes Mal say fine and tow him. Soon everyone but Joe gets caught, and they would all find the go-karts broken. Sam and Zoe would wonder why, and B would facepalm and would try to get the wheels on honest. Mal and Scott would arrive at the first totem, and they would spray it. We can see Mal trying to detach Scott's cart while Scott is painting, but Scott immediately fights Mal for the one working go-kart. After fighting, B would finally arrive, and Scott sees him. Scott would yell out to B that Mal's cheating, and B would help Scott push Mal away from the one working go-kart. That makes Scott free to move on, but B now has to deal with Mal, who fights him. After defeating B, Mal uses B's working go-kart to catch up with Scott. By the time Mal arrives at the second and last totem bowl, Scott would have already spray painted it and won the challenge. Mal is just the angriest ever. So angry, he activates Chester, who would be yelling, and Scott would be laughing at Mal, who lets a personality show. Scott wouldn't know what's happening to Mal, as he has never shown any of his personalities before. Chris announces Scott's victory. In the elimination, Scott gets to choose who goes home. Scott would ask Sam to bring DakotaZoid. DakotaZoid arrives with Sam. Scott would pretend that the vote was hard to decide, but then he would expose Mal's shady tactics, like sabotaging challenges for the maggots and cheating with Dakota. He would credit B for finding out about the cheating. Scott would then take jabs at Dakota for helping Mal cheat for who knows how long. Mal would be so angry again and would try to fight Scott, but would just turn into Chester. Chris and Chef are shocked at all of this. Yeah, they boot Mal/Chester, and Chris, being cynical, would also boot Dakota, which Sam is just so sad about and even cries. Dakota would tell Sam that she'll miss him and they should meet up after all this. Chester would be commenting on how badly behaved kids are these days as he is booted off. Everyone's happy that the cheater's gone, and I love writing what ifs. In this episode, everyone is glad that Mal is gone. Chris would announce the 2 challenges. The first one is the aircraft building one. I think Joe would want to work with B. He has building experience as shown in Ice Ice Baby. Joe would ask B if she can work with him. B would agree at first to help her. For the aircrafts, we'll keep the same stuff for the same peeps, so Joe would still get the hot air balloon, Zoe would still have to make the plane, and Scott would need to make a bird. And for the new peeps, B gets a rocket, and Sam gets a helicopter. For the building, Zoe would be able to find parts. Joe would ask B to find some parts, and I believe B would do so. I don't know if Sam plays any video games that require building. I don't know. I feel like if any of games require searching for something, then he could probably find some pieces. I don't know. After finding parts, B would give them to Joe and starts finding his parts, but Joe would ask B to help build her hot air balloon. B just rolls his eyes and continues on finding his parts. Scott wouldn't be hating on Zoe, and the two would probably be friendly to each other right now in the competition. When B comes back with his parts, Joe questions why he didn't build her balloon first. B does not like this bossing and would abandon her, leaving her yelling at B to make her balloon. Joe would then ask Sam to make her balloon. I think Sam would be able to find the jet engines and maybe have an idea to create a chair on it and fly with it. Before that, Joe would force Sam to build her balloon, and Sam would be like, "Hey, I'm building my helicopter." Between everyone, I think B would be able to build the same rocket as Cameron was able to build. He would show Chris, and he wins a smoke machine. I'm sure everyone can build herself sooner or later. Zoe and Scott have their aircraft. Sam would be able to attach a burner to a wheelchair or something. It flies, but it's not as good looking as Cameron's. Sam would place a chair or a motorcycle on his engine. Heather would still take over the hot air balloon and the money, so now everyone's trying to go after her. Now everyone would go after Heather, but Scott would be going after B, as he still sees him as a threat for his smarts and wants to get him out. While everyone is going for Heather, Scott would see the fire goats and would lead them to B. B wouldn't notice, and Scott goes in front of B, blocking his view. B would feel the heat from behind as he sees the goats breathe fire. The flames get to the smoke machine, and the smoke machine combusts, exploding it and causing B to fall. Joe and Scott would fall next because of the goats. Zoe would fall down, but would be saved by the goats. Sam would crash into the hot air balloon and would use his gamer moves to beat Heather. Sam would go hard mode, and treats Heather like the final boss, and would take the money and fall down into the water. Sam wins. In the vote, Scott tells Zoe to vote off B for being too smart. Joe would probably vote for B, as he refused to help her. B would signal Sam to vote for Joe for being bossy. In the end, B is voted out for being too smart. B would walk out sad, and Scott would be celebrating and making comments. Joe would also be like, "That's what you get as a traitor." Sam would be sad that B is gone, as they were friends. In this episode, we can see Zoe sticking with Scott, and Joe would force Sam to be her ally. Scott would want Sam's vote so Joe can get out, as Scott would now see Joe as a very strong and needs to get out. Joe would start to think Scott is a threat, as he could sabotage, as shown in the last episode. Joe would try to get Zoe's vote. Scott would go up to Sam, asking if he can ally with him. Instead of Joe, Sam happily agrees to, but Joe would walk in and take Sam away from Scott. Joe would say that Scott is not taking Sam away. This causes some competition between the two. Scott would grab Zoe to get away from Joe. Scott would still set up traps and trap Chris in the toilet, causing the cooking challenge. It's a cooking challenge. Joe would force Sam to get ingredients for her, and Sam says yes. While looking for the item, Scott sees Sam, who seems to be a bit down. He would ask Sam if Joe has been bossing him, and Sam would say kind of, as he had to carry her for 2 challenges now. Scott would make the point that Joe is a threat who can control the game and win. That's why they need to vote her out. I think Sam would agree Joe could become a threat, so he agrees to work with Scott for a little bit. Scott thanks him and gives toxic mushrooms to Sam. For the food making, Zoe would still make the salad. I can see Joe finding a mutant animal, or in this case, a mutant rat, and cooking it. As a gamer, I feel like Sam would have the idea to make mushrooms into chips. Scott would copy Sam and get some more mushrooms. Sam isn't genius like Cameron, so I can see him undercooking the mushrooms. Joe would do a good job at cooking the rat. Scott isn't sabotaging Zoe, so he wouldn't put poison ivy. And Scott, I feel like he would do a bit much when differentiating chips. He might overcook it, causing the chips to be burnt and brittle. DJ is still grossed out, so everyone still has to eat their food. Now Scott would switch his burnt chips with Sam's undercooked chips, as he'd rather eat undercooked over straight up ash. The chips portion isn't big like Joe's rat, so I feel like Scott can gobble it down in one sitting. Scott wins and doesn't get the tracking collar for the next challenge, which is to touch the pole without getting pied by Chef. I feel like Scott would be running in a clear path. Scott would let Zoe and Sam run with him, but that means they have to run fast as he knows where everyone is. Scott is aware of this but wants to keep Zoe and Sam. That means Joe would be behind, and Scott is not okay with that. The two would argue with Scott telling Joe to go away, but Joe wants to be with Sam and Zoe. Scott notices Chef running from behind, so he gets the idea to trip Joe and let her get caught by Chef. Scott does exactly that, and Joe is caught. Soon the three make it near the finish and are halted by Fang, who wants Scott. Scott would ask Sam and Zoe to help fight Fang. Zoe would help beat Fang, and Sam would use his gamer moves. While the two are fighting Fang, Scott leaves the battle to touch the pole, winning the challenge. Zoe would kind of be pissed that Scott just left the fight and could have left her and Sam to die if they haven't beaten up Fang. In the elimination, Sam and Zoe would agree with Scott to vote out Joe. Joe would come up to Zoe and Sam, asking if they can vote for Scott, but they won't. Joe is out and is very angry that Scott caused their elimination. And Zoe wants payback, as Scott almost left her to die. This is the flower finding challenge. Zoe would set her eye on allying with Sam, so they can kick Scott and go to the finale together. Zoe is not Commando Zoe because she didn't rage last challenge. Chris hands out 3 pieces of the map to each contestant, and Scott would steal a piece from Zoe and run away. This would get Zoe pretty angry, causing her to become Commando Zoe. Sam would be intimidated by the sudden change of Zoe, but he's left with her. Zoe would tell Sam that they gotta take down Scott, so they run after him. Soon, when Scott reaches Larry, he would be able to grab the flower, but is eaten right after Larry arises. Later, Sam and Zoe would arrive. Zoe would straight up command Sam to use his gamer moves on the plant to get the flower. Scott would be screaming for his life, but Zoe would jump into the mouth to battle Larry and to just get the flower. Sam would be stumped that if he's in the finale, he has to go against Commando Zoe, in which he is starting to find scary. Scott would see Zoe open her way into Larry, and Scott would apologize for stealing her map and sabotaging her in challenges. Zoe wouldn't fall for Scott's attempt for her to save him, and she would tell him that she just wants him gone. Scott would change his mind and would tell Zoe that he'll give up the chance at the money for her to save him. Zoe would kinda be touched by this. Scott truly wants to be saved and is giving up his chance to win the money to be saved. I think Zoe would actually warm up a little bit, giving him a hand out of the map. Scott hands her the flowers as they're getting out, but Zoe would throw the flower out to Sam, hoping he would win for her. Zoe now uses both of her hands to get Scott out, and would tell Scott that he's a good person because he saved her from peeps like Mal and helped her through the last challenge, she'd save him. Scott would truly be thankful and tell Zoe that she should win, as him sabotaging wasn't really fair for everyone. He means it. Zoe would thank Scott a lot, and the two's friendship is reinstated. Sam crosses the finish line, terrified of Commando Zoe. Sam wins, and gets to choose who goes to the finale with him. Scott would tell Sam that Zoe deserves to be in the finale, and Zoe is just happy that she's friends with Scott. Sam would express his worries and concerns with Commando Zoe, and tell Zoe that he found her very terrifying, and she commanded him, and he never believed what others said about Scott sabotaging. He feels Scott is a better contestant, as Zoe seems to be powerful as Commando Zoe. Sam would choose Scott, and Scott and Zoe are very shocked The two would just hug it out as they're happy that they're friends. Sorry, Zoe fans. Finale time. This what if is now more like a rewrite, as both finalists have their own alternate ending. I arranged everyone with who I think they would vote for. Anne Maria would think Scott looks better, I don't know. Cameron and Zoe were friends with Scott. Lightning thinks Scott is cooler, and Mal would think Scott's playing was more entertaining. B and Dawn would vote Sam, as they were friends, and they did not like Mal or Scott sabotaging. Rick probably doesn't like sabotaging either, so he goes with Sam. Dakota Zoid is very good friends with Sam. Joe would not like Scott, and Stacy, I feel like she'd like Sam more. In the beginning, Sam and Scott would get their calls. Scott could call Pappy, and I don't know who Sam would see, Dakota Zoid. The challenge is a Cruciseum battle, where they have to fight with armor. I feel like Scott can come up with armor and a sword and dress up somewhat like Lightning did. Sam is built for this, so he can go all out with the most protective armor, being made of all metal, and a powerful sword and shield. The fight would go like this. I could see Scott charging, but Sam is able to dodge and hit Scott with his gamer moves. For the first half of the battle, we can see Sam decimate Scott, as Sam would use all his gamer moves on Scott. In the second part, however, Scott could pick up on Sam's pattern of dodge, hit, and would counter that by pretending to hit Sam, and then Sam misses Scott for nothing, and Scott bats Sam hard. It's a close match, but in Scott's ending, Scott is able to hit Sam so many times, it shatters his armor, and Scott is able to KO Sam. Everyone would be cheering for him. Everyone cheering for him would be so happy, especially Zoe. And Mal smirks a tiny bit, but he's mostly upset he didn't win. In Sam's ending, Sam changes his pattern to hit, dodge, hit, and is able to combo Scott. And for the finishing touch, he jumps into the sky and bats Scott, causing him to pass out and get KO'd. Everyone cheering for him is happy. And Dawn hug Sam. Dakota Zoid would grab Sam and reach in for a kiss, and Mal would just be upset. And that is what would happen if Mal was the main personality in Revenge of the Island. Sorry, I tried to write Mal. I thought he would be hard to write because he just does stuff randomly, but I'd say I'm kind of glad with this outcome. We would get a bunch of changes, like we wouldn't see all of Mike's personality, because Mal would be good at hiding them and only shows Chester in the end. Peeps like B, Joe, Don would have made it further, and Anne Maria would have been third voted off. Zoe wouldn't have a rivalry with Scott. Scott wouldn't be in cast and eventually in a robot suit. And Mal would have been the main villain of the season. I also tried to make him a bit obvious, and I didn't mean to bring All-Star Zoe or Cameron here. We would have had a rivalry with Mal and Scott, which is pretty interesting. It would have been Sabotager against Sabotager. I hope you liked this video. I want to thank y'all for the immense support. Like, we hit 100 subscribers, which is truly amazing, and 1,000 views on the World Tour video. I'm so grateful for all of your support, and I want to thank y'all so much. I didn't expect to grow this fast, but it was possible thanks to y'all. Also, here's the voting chart. It's also available in a spreadsheet link, which is in the description. The tier list is also in the description. I hope you enjoyed. Thanks for all the support. My next video is on All-Stars, so leave down some topics and I might consider. I'll see y'all in the next What If. Bye, y'all.